Alas, poor Yorick, I doth knew him well. And then he died, and so I cut open his skull to put my dice inside. Hello and welcome to this episode of How to Be a Great GM and how to make the most out of character death so that your players welcome it. Now, when we look at character death, there are a few key things which I feel are absolutely necessary to have in order to make sure that your player, once their character is stone dead without any chance of resurrection or being brought back to life, applauds you. So the question is, how do you do it? Well, these are my thoughts on how you make character death something that the players look after. The first thing is relevance. For me, a character that just dies in a random encounter or with some low life and it's just an accident, that's tragic. It really is tragic. And I hate to say it, but it's obviously a poor choice on behalf of the player and as a GM not stepping in and intervening in such a meaningless and really pointless death. Death should have relevance. There should be some deeper meaning behind it. It should be the character going up against the big bad because they've made a rash decision and now suffering the ultimate consequence. It should be a sacrifice of the character to save the rest of the party. There are many ways in which the character's death can be relevant. Now, I'm not advocating that you plan out when you're going to kill your characters. That's not your job. Your job, however, is to make sure that when the players are reporting that their character's health, their whatever stamina that they have, whatever the system is, when they're reporting that that's getting low, it's up to you to decide how you pursue it. Do the monsters decide to take them captive? Do the monsters flee for some unknown reason? Does the big bad arrive in the nick of time to turn everything around and so the big bad slaughters the PC? Whatever you do, you need to make sure that it's relevant. And if the players have just made a stupid mistake, do you really want a stupid mistake being the end of your campaign? I don't think so. I certainly have put in far more effort than I should have in terms of my campaigns, and I don't like it when players have made a silly, rash decision to charge into some chamber and they all get burnt to death by an unknown entity. It doesn't work for me. I like it to have value. Now, the next thing is that the death must be described in a cool way. It has to be spectacularly well done. Describe the hand clutching the blade on the chest, or the throat gushing warm blood that seeps with life essence onto the floor, painting a picture of death. You need to describe it so that players are in awe at this final death. This is not just a, oh, you reach zero, you die. Well, that's a pity. They've got to be angels weeping in the clouds, demons laughing from hell, sprites and nymphs gathering together, little bluebirds bringing little twigs to lay around the character, flowers miraculously growing around the base of them. I'm being overly dramatic, but you get the point. Don't just dismiss the death, make the death as epic as possible so it's relevant and it's been described in a super cool way. If you look at the death of Boromir, for example, in The Lord of the Rings, Tolkien didn't just say, no, he got shot with arrows and he died. He got peppered with arrows, each arrow driving home the power of the Uruk-hai, the anger of Saruman. So once you've described it in a dramatic way, we then need to look at the next point, which is whether it's tragic death, whether it's a noble death, it must be final. It must be beyond the point of no return. So when Boromir is peppered, he's not hit with 1 or 2 or 3 arrows. He's hit with 6 arrows. And then an Uruk-hai comes running up and slices off his head, and then takes the head and puts it on a spike and displays it for all to see. So there's some kind of dramatic conclusion to the death that really allows for no misinterpretation. The character is gone. That ultimate solution is what is needed for the player to have conclusion. But it is also the idea that the death is going to carry on for a little bit. At least the character's essence is going to carry on for a little bit, because their head is now on a spike for all to see, so they can glare with their open, hollow eyes at any passerbys. You then need to have the NPCs that the party has met before reference the PC and ask, "Oh, where's Ned?" And then when they get told that he has died, they need to react appropriately and not just go, "Oh, that's a pity," unless they are the callous type of NPC. But the idea of celebrating the PC after they've died is something that not a lot of GMs do. And it's a really powerful tool for building a bond between the NPC who's mourning the loss of the PC and the players. They will see this NPC as being real, as reacting to that death, and will bond with them, because assumedly they're also unhappy about the death of the PC. So the events after the death are as important as the death itself. And that's something that you have to keep in the back of your mind and drive home whenever you can, just to make it, well, that much more meaningful. Erect a statue of him in a local village, for example, or have a young girl come up with a little dolly who's now been remade or reshaped or repainted to look like the hero before they died. That will be a very powerful, very long-lasting impression made upon your players, and will seem as if the whole death had absolute relevance and meaning, and the players will react to it. Another technique that you can use, and this one is not used very often, but again, it's a fairly powerful one, is you can bring back the PC as a ghost or as a guide. Certainly worked very well in Star Wars, and they kept bringing back all the dead ones to continue giving advice to the living, which was fairly useful, as well as a very strong plot device and way of moving the story forward. So you can do exactly the same thing. Oh, he died, but he was a warrior and was never pious or religious. Well, maybe he's still trapped here. So it becomes a quest to release his body from this plane. Oh, she was particularly religious? Well, now she speaks to them every now and again through statues of her particular god and provides them with words of wisdom. However you have your player death happen, the trick is always to make the players feel as if it's the coolest thing that could possibly have happened to their character. So as I mentioned, just to recap, it must be relevant, and it can be difficult to make it relevant if the players have done something stupid. So it must be relevant, or as close to as possible. The alternative is that it could be absolutely pointless, but then you have to work so much harder on all of the other components so that the player doesn't feel bitter or resentful. And yes, the player made a mistake to get into that situation with a non-big bad monster, but you don't want to punish them twice. They already feel stupid for starting the combat, and now their character dies. So relevance is important. It needs to be described in a cool way. You must do it. You must describe it in a cool way. This is not just a goblin that's been hacked in half. This is a player's character. They've invested time and effort, and they deserve to get some kind of descriptor out of that. And give them a few last words as well. They're on zero. You're semi-conscious. You are unconscious. You are dying. Suddenly you feel the warm embrace of the paladin as she looks down upon you, tears streaming down her face. What are your last words? So let the player milk the scene for all it's worth. This is Dungeons and Dragons, or this is Fighting Fantasy, or Dungeoneer, or Lone Wolf, or Dragon Age, whatever. It's about heroes, and heroes get last words. So give it that cool factor. Give them their last words. And make sure that whatever they've done is then lauded across the lands. Even if it's a small act and a village changes its name, or the tavern they go to has changed its name in honor of dear old takes hat off. Dear old Martin, may you rest in peace. We've now called this the Brown Martin Inn. Something like that will touch the hearts of your players like you cannot believe, and will make for a very strong case. Something that is difficult with fantasy, of course, is the character coming back to life. The trick then is, well, what do you do with the player in the meantime? Sure, the players might say, oh, well, we're going to bring your character back. He was way too valuable. We're going to go and find some kind of resurrection spell or some kind of return life to the dead corpse spell or something along those lines. We're going to go and get it. But they don't have the coin for it, or they don't know where to go for it, or it's not very common in your world and it becomes this major quest. What do you then do with the player whose character's dead? They can't rock up at every session just to be quiet whilst their corpse is dragged from one hillside to the next as the party goes looking for some deranged priest who's going to bring back this corpse as a real life living creature. My advice is then to turn that player into an NPC from the village. Not someone who's significant, they don't have amazing skills, they're not rolling up a new character. They are playing an NPC which you give them. Now, why do I say that? Why do I say rather give them an NPC that they can play with, give them some goals, give them some backstory, but they don't get to create the character themselves? The reason why I say that is that if your player creates another PC on the fly or has weeks to plan and prepare or however, if they create that character, at first it might be a throwaway character, but 8 adventures later, they still haven't resurrected the main corpse, the party is now coalesced around this new character. Do they then really want to resurrect the old one who died? And do they want to forget about the old one that died and just leave it underneath a bush somewhere? Well, your job would be to remind them constantly that it's still with them. But then when they resurrect the person, do they want to go back to that old character or do they want to go on with this new character? If the resurrection happens and the party says, well, we don't actually want to play with Martin anymore, we'd rather, play with Felicity here. She's much more interesting as a character and she's got better skills than Martin ever did. Then it makes the death meaningless and the entire quest meaningless. It leaves everything rather pointless, doesn't it? So by giving them an NPC that you've created that's from the village that has a limited skill set, that doesn't really do much other than fulfill the role-playing appetite of your player, it means that when they restore Martin to life, the NPC can go back to being an NPC and the player can pick up Martin and off they go. So that would be my advice on what to do with the player once their character has died. If, of course, the character has died permanently and the party has no interest in restoring them to life and have basically just written them off as a bad debt, then the player must then go and roll up a new PC and then you have to introduce the new PC to the party. And there's videos on the channel on how to do that. That is an option and that's the most regular option that can happen. There are some spells in some fantasy settings that will restore life to the person, but as a random creature, not necessarily as the species they were. I'm not a huge fan of that because well, then that's taking agency away from the player and making them suddenly play a bullfrog, which is not very interesting. Unless that then becomes familiar for the local wizard and the player makes a new character. But even then, it's still a little bit meaningless in my opinion. So there are options, there are opportunities, and when death comes along, if you fulfill this relevance, description, post-death enjoyment, revelation or reverie, I guarantee you that your players will respond to death a lot easier, a lot better, and with a much better cheer than they normally would, which is with despair, with dejection, and with resentment. I hope you found this little video interesting, or at least useful. Hit that like button if you did. Hit the subscribe button if you want to see more. And if you haven't heard about it yet, www.rpgtablefinder.com is our in-house player GM matchmaking software that we've generated and written and turned into a web-based app for you that you can go along, punch in your details and find tables to play with either online or in real life if you're in close proximity to one another. And we did that because we're responding to you guys writing comments about how do we find other players, how do we find other tables, how do we find GMs. And the nice thing about rpgtablefinder.com is that mostly it's only been advertised to you. So that means that if you're a fan of the channel, others who are also fans of the channel and the way that I present role-playing, kindred spirits are out there. And all you have to do is head on over to rpgtablefinder.com and you will find them there ready and waiting to play a game. Until next time, I wish you and yours the happiest of games.